as did analogous concepts such as the New Deal, didn't begin to hit diminishing returns until quite late. Churchill's view, therefore, was considered by many people alarmist, and the Conservative Party went out of its way to drop it for a long time. Orwell was more worried by state control over things like the media and the war economy.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, when he thought of an overmighty state, he thought of things like the nuclear state. In fact, one of his very best short essays is written in 46, maybe it could be late 45. It's post Nagasaki, post Hiroshima, and it's called "You and the Nuclear Bomb," or "You and the Atom." Sorry, it would have been called "The Atom Bomb." "You and the Atom Bomb." He gets a lot of work done in a few hundred words, and he says, "Of course, the immediate fear is that of annihilation and apocalypse, but there's another fear that one might pay attention to that no one's drawn attention to yet. What if this kind of weaponry makes the state completely invulnerable, so that no guerrilla warfare, no insurrection, no revolution could ever overthrow it? The state would be armored behind a sort of," he doesn't say plutonium, but behind a shield that was impenetrable. It would lead necessarily to a tyranny which would have the horrible idea of being unoverthrowable.
An interesting issue. It's an interesting observation.
So he was certainly, as many leftists, ab initio are supposed to be. And Marxism is the first ideology to pronounce the idea in so many words of the withering away of the state, of replacing the government of men with the administration of things, as Marx puts it very well. I think it's in the 1844 manuscript. The sight of this had been lost by the struggle to replace predatory and fascistic capitalism and imperialism with social democratic government, where government was considered axiomatically good for that reason. But the idea was that one should always have a weather eye to the overmighty state. Suddenly, at the end of the war, the earth appears to be covered in military superpowers, whose rivalry, this is Orwell's great insight, may conceal a secret sympathy they have with one another and a common interest in maintaining a balance of terror. There were moments in the Cold War where one was forced to think that might be what was going on, that the Cold War had become about itself only, no larger or nobler subject. It was never quite true, but it was never quite untrue either.
Well, certainly.
And there were certainly managers of it, people like Henry Kissinger, for example, I would nominate, and possibly Hal Sonnenfeld, who felt far more sympathy with the managers of crisis in Beijing and in Moscow than they did with troublesome movements in subordinate countries like Czechoslovakia or Vietnam. So Orwell's never completely wrong. And even when he's wrong, he's got hold of an insight that needs to be retained.
So he was, in your mind, a leftist, but he was also...
A radical, certainly.
He was embraced by the right.
A radical, certainly, and because of his emergence out of a family and a society that he had every reason to distrust. I mean, his father, after all, had made a living out of selling Indian opium under British imperial auspices to China, who was compelled to buy it. And it's very fascinating that there's no mention of any father in any of Orwell's works, not at all. Except very occasional, very distant, and always very negative references, even when he describes England as a family with the wrong members in control. We're a family, but the wrong members in control. He describes various poor relations and aunts who are horribly sat upon, and various rich cousins and so on, and who are awfully kowtowed and deferred. There's no father in this family.
At least he called it Big Brother. Could have been worse.
Then you see it's Big Brother, whereas obviously the analogy to the totalitarian dictatorship is the unchanging eternal father. Yep. But he's already coped with that by an early essay in which he says that his initial problem with Christianity, I think this is in Such Were the Joys, his book about his prep school, was that you had to love a father figure who you also had to fear. An insuperable problem for Christianity, of course, that he saw coming right away. But so we know that he was fond of his mother. We know that he couldn't bring himself to talk about his father, and that his general attitude to family life was somewhat distraught. Yes. So, because his hatred for imperialism, for British class snobbery, and hypocrisy, for all the so-called vices and so-called virtues that he thought were vices of the suburban, small-time aspirant, those who hated the working class but feared and groveled to the class immediately above them. He was not going to be able to express his dissent in a conservative form. He had no choice but to move to the left and to the underdogs and the working class. That's why it's interesting that when he sees that Hayek has a critique of illegitimate power, even though it comes from the right wing, that he's at once able to summarize in a few sentences what that critique is.
And the virtue of it. And the virtue of it.
And the virtue of it, yes.
Well, he strikes...
Indeed, yes. Yeah.
all, I guess, as a truth teller, which is part of the power of facing and part of the integrity you talk about in the book.
I forget now who it is he writes about, but I came across it looking for something else the other night. He's writing about someone whose religious opinions he finds ridiculous, even contemptible, but he says there's something charming about the person, and he said if all Christians were like this guy, the reputation of religion might not have sunk as low as it has. I'm paraphrasing this poorly, but he was always willing to be fair to an individual, even if that person represented a cause or a party that he found objectionable.
We're almost out of time. I want to turn to Christopher Hitchens, who strikes me as a somewhat Orwellian figure, used in a complimentary way, a mix of apparent contradictions, someone who's taken political stands that I'm sure have cost you some calumny, maybe not up to the level of Orwell's, or maybe, I don't know. But do you see yourself in his footsteps?
No, I've had to write very firmly about this because some people have very kindly said what you just said, and others less kindly have said, aha, Hitchens wants the mantle of Orwell and so forth, by which they don't intend a compliment.
It's non-Orwellian in that way. It's a paradox.
And I say, well, both, for whatever reason, kindness and generosity, or it's obverse, that anyone might want to say this, it wouldn't be true. I mean, the most conspicuous thing about Orwell, I think, is his moral courage. He never had a steady publisher. He never had a steady job. He never had a steady income. He was always ill. He was always insecure, and he often had to risk, and did risk, his life. I haven't had to do any of these things. And I have a hard time filling the quota of stuff that people want me to write and publish. I mean, I always got something I'm supposed to be doing for which there's a space already reserved once I've written it. That wasn't always true, I have to say, but my struggle in the garret wasn't a very epic one.
Well, you've lived past 46,
so
it helps.
And also, yeah, I would have been dead 14 years ago if I was him. Having had the last few years of that life rendered very horrible by poverty and illness and unhappiness. So I've never had to find out how I would shape up if I was threatened with poverty or imprisonment or death or obscurity if I carried on the way I was. I've never had to know what that would be like. So, in other words, the comparison is absurd. However, I don't mind saying, and I think it's clear to some people, that ever since I first read him, everything he's had to say has weighed